Hi, in this part of the tutorial I am going to cover some of the basics of the GAMBAS IDE or Integrated Development Environment and describe GAMBAS programming and GAMBAS programs in general. The GAMBAS Integrated Development Environment or IDE is the application that allows you to develop, manipulate, and modify GAMBAS programs. The IDE consists of the graphical programming environment, which provides the tools and integrated compiler within which the programmer builds their graphical applications. In other words, this is where a programmer creates, views, tests, saves, and compiles GAMBAS program projects. There are four elements to GAMBAS programs and GAMBAS programming. First is the Runtime Environment, which is a software component which is installed in the operating system. This is installed when the GAMBAS IDE is installed on a computer, or the component which is installed as part of the package that contains a compiled program meant for distribution. The runtime environment actually interprets and allows compiled GAMBAS programs to run in the Linux operating system. The runtime, as it's called, provides the resources and communications between the compiled GAMBAS programs and the operating system. Classic BASIC programs were fully interpreted, which means that the actual BASIC program, as written, was run through a software interpreter which could actually parse and execute the English-like instructions in the BASIC program file, one by one, each time a user ran the program. Many languages actually compile program source code into a directly executable binary program file, which can be directly executed on a target system. This is usually cleaner, more efficient, and produces faster programs. But it means that the resulting programs have to be specifically created for a target system, and the compiled binaries are not transportable from system to system. It can also mean that each program may need to be recompiled whenever a computer system itself is changed or updated. A solution to these problems was created by compiling the source code into a generic, semi-compiled format, sometimes called P-code. Then a software component referred to as a runtime actually runs the compiled programs. This allows greater portability and easier updates, since only the runtime component has to be system specific or has to be designed to run on different versions of the target system. This is the method used by several non-system specific universal languages. The original Visual Basic, GAMBAS, and many cross-platform languages use this execution method. Next, there is the IDE itself, which is the programming application where a programmer creates and edits GAMBAS programs. Within the IDE are where programming projects are created. These projects contain all of the elements of an individual program while they are being created. And finally, there are the compiled GAMBAS programs. These are the standalone graphical programs that users can run directly once the GAMBAS system is set up. Now, the GAMBAS 3 Integrated Development Environment, or IDE. When you launch GAMBAS, a startup screen appears. This is where you can create new projects or continue existing projects. Also, there is the Tips of the Day pop-up. You can close this message box or simply turn these tips off so they do not appear every time you launch the IDE. You can turn the tips of the day back on from within the IDE if you want to do that later. You can also click through all the tips of the day one after another from this message box. I have found the tips to be useful and interesting, but it is entirely a personal preference. To turn them off, within the Tips of the Day dialog box, uncheck Show Tips on Startup. You can turn them back on in the Help menu on the Startup screen. When the Tips of the Day message box comes up, recheck Show Tips on Startup. You can also turn them on the same way from inside the IDE's Help menu. After you have closed the Tips of the Day, there are several options available on the left pane of the Startup screen. The ones that I am going to cover at this time are New Project, Open Project, and Recent Projects. First, Recent Projects, in the left-hand pane of the GAMBAS startup screen. This allows you to open your most recently accessed projects. To open one, click Recent Projects in the left-hand pane if it's not already selected. Then select the project you want from the right-hand pane of the dialog box. Next is Open Project. If you have previously created a project and it is not in Recent Projects, click Open Project. A Select a Project dialog box will come up. You can navigate to where the project directory is located using the left-hand pane of the project dialog box. Then select the project selection rectangle at the top of the right-hand pane in the dialog box. This brings up the project in the IDE. And finally, New Project, which allows you to create a new program project from scratch. After selecting New Project, a dialog box appears in which you can select the type of project you will be creating. There are quite a few options demonstrating the power and flexibility of GAMBAS. For now, the selection I will be using in this tutorial series is the Graphical Application option to create programs that run within the Linux desktop environment. The New Project choice takes you through creating a GAMBAS project in the same manner that was demonstrated in the second GAMBAS tutorial video, creating the Hello World program to test the GAMBAS installation. Basically, select New Project from the left-hand pane and select Graphical Application and the Next button. GAMBAS now asks a user to select the parent directory for the new project. Again, select Next. And GAMBAS will now ask for a project name and project title. For this example, I am going to call both Basic New Project. Finally, select OK. The new project in the GAMBAS Integrated Development Environment, or IDE, will come up. This is where you can access the various project resources and utilize the various elements in the GAMBAS IDE to create programs. Once within the GAMBAS IDE, there are several important parts of the Integrated Development Environment. First is the main work area. This is where forms and code windows are displayed when they are selected. Most coding and creation of the program's actual user interface takes place in this area. Then there is the menu bar. This is where specific menus relating to both controlling the GAMBAS IDE and project-specific actions can be accessed. I am going to describe some of the menu options that are important to know at this point. The first item in the menu is the File menu. This menu, as the name suggests, contains items related to opening and saving files. The first three options on the File menu are New Project, Open Project, and Open Recent, which functions similarly to those functions on the startup screen. Next is Open File, which allows you to open text files within your project. Then Save Project, which saves all of the files associated with your currently opened project. After that option is Save Project As. This allows you to save the currently open project under a new project name, thereby effectively creating a new project identical to the old project. This is very useful when experimenting because it allows you to create new projects to experiment on without altering functional programs. And finally, Quit. which closes the GAMBAS IDE. It will ask you to save the current project if you have made any changes since the last time you saved your project. If you have made changes, you must select which action you wish to perform before exiting the GAMBAS IDE. The second menu is the Edit menu. Some of the more important features in the Edit menu are Undo. This menu choice undoes the actions entered by the programmer, such as typing text or adding or modifying controls. This choice moves backwards chronologically, action by action. This is useful if you make a mistake or change your mind. Below that is Redo. This allows you to reverse an undo command, again, step by step. The next actions, cut, copy, and paste, do just that. They are used to move or replicate elements in a project, such as code text or controls. There are quite a few additional useful functions within this menu which will become more relevant, and I will cover them as this tutorial series moves into more advanced programming topics and projects. You will also note that the menu editor is found on this menu. The menu editor is used to create menus within program forms, and the menu editor will have its own tutorial video later. The next menu is the Project menu. This basically is where programmers build and compile projects to make programs that are usable outside of the GAMBAS IDE. Some of the functions in this menu we will immediately find necessary. The first option is Compile. This menu choice compiles the current project internally and will flag any errors in the program. The next option that is important at this point is Make. This menu choice, if you select Executable, will create a standalone GAMBAS executable and place it where you specify. Again, there are more options on this menu, but the last one of interest at this time is Properties. This brings up the main Project Properties box. At this point, you should be careful. Though some of the various options will let you reset the choices to their default values, some will not, and changing some properties without understanding their effects can potentially cause unnecessary frustration. So if you want to try these out, I recommend creating some very simple, low-importance projects to experiment with until you are more comfortable with the various project options. Don't worry, you will pick these up as you experiment creating programs and by following future tutorials. Next, there is the Debug menu. These options help programmers find problems and test projects while they are being created. The items in the Debug menu are a little more advanced than these first tutorial videos, so I intend to cover debugging programs and other useful programming tips in greater detail in future tutorials. The next important menu is the View menu. This menu is related to the IDE itself, and fundamentally it is used to turn various IDE elements on and off. First is Project. This is on by default. It is the leftmost pane, and when it is on, it shows all of the elements in the current project. Next is the Properties sheet. This is also on by default. It is the rightmost pane in the IDE, and when it is on, it shows the Properties tab of the currently selected project element. It also contains the Hierarchy tab and the Toolbox. If it is off, it can be dragged back onto the screen by clicking and dragging it from the right border of the work area. The next option is Console. This displays program information at the bottom of the IDE work area when the program is running. It is most useful during debugging. You can turn it off if you don't need it to be visible. Next is Hide Menu Bar. Again, this can be hidden if you desire more screen real estate. However, I generally have it up. When it is hidden, a quick button is displayed on the far right of the GAMBAS IDE project toolbar. It is the button with the 3 horizontal lines and will unhide the menu bar so it can be accessed. Finally, there is the Close All Windows. It closes everything in the IDE work area except the project window. Double-clicking on the main form in the project window reopens all of the various windows within the IDE to their previous states. Then there is the Tools menu. This menu contains useful options that make using the IDE and creating programs easier. A couple of very useful menu items are Find and Replace, which are used to search through class files where program code is stored. These menu items are used to locate and change specific program code and element names. Next, Send Project by Mail. This is used to send the current GAMBAS project to others if the email client is set up on the computer. Then, Shortcuts. This brings up a list of the current and customizable keyboard shortcuts. This customization box has the option to reset all of the shortcuts to their defaults. Next, Preferences. This option brings up the Ide Properties box. Here is where specific elements and characteristics of the IDE itself can be set. It is important to note that the GAMBAS help options rely on online resources. If the computer is not always online, the Help and Applications selection will allow the option of using offline documentation. Once it is switched on, the documentation help files can be downloaded so that the help options can be used when the computer does not have an active internet connection. And finally, the Help menu. First, there is the Help browser. This is a web browser that is built into the IDE which can access the online GAMBAS help files. Then, Tips of the Day, which is where the Tips of the Day dialog box can be accessed from within the GAMBAS IDE. Once the dialog box is displayed, the Tips of the Day can be turned on or off. Then, System Information, which displays the basic information about the computer upon which the GAMBAS installation is running. And finally, About GAMBAS. This displays an animation listing information about GAMBAS and the major contributors to the GAMBAS project. That completes the overview of the GAMBAS 3 IDE menus. Now we will move on to the rest of the IDE. On the far left-hand side is the Project Elements pane. This shows the components of a project such as forms, modules, and data elements like graphic images and additional files, etc. This pane is used to create, navigate, and manipulate the major project elements. The Element, Properties, and Hierarchies tabs are in the far right side of the IDE. This pane allows a programmer to set and view important structures and elements such as containers and controls during design time. More specifically, the Elements, Properties tab is where the design time properties such as color, placement, and functionality are set for the various elements in a GAMBAS program. And the Hierarchy tab displays a tree structure of all the parts of a project and within which container or control the individual GUI elements and containers exist. It's basically a map of the location of each individual element of a program and where it lies in the overall structure of the project. Here is an example of a more complex program's hierarchy showing the project's overall structure. The Toolbox is the location containing the drag-and-drop elements, such as controls and containers, that are available to be placed within the form when creating a GAMBAS program. There are multiple tabs in the Toolbox that hold different types of available controls and elements. I will be demonstrating some of the various objects in the Toolbox in greater detail in upcoming tutorial videos. Right now, the most important tabs are the Form and Containers tabs. Most of the basic controls which are placed on a form are located in the Form tab. Subcontainers which can be placed on a form are located on the Containers tab. Once a container is placed on a form, additional controls can then be placed within those containers and accessed somewhat separately from the other controls within that form. This is very useful for isolating different groups of controls. The Project Toolbar provides quick access to IDE functions that are related to the overall managing of GAMBAS projects, such as saving, compiling, debugging, and running a project. The Project Toolbar contains the quick buttons, New Project, Open Project, Save Project As, Project Properties, Preferences, Make Executable, Compile, Compile All, Test, Run, Pause, Stop, Step, Forward, Finish Current Function, and Run until Current Line. When there is an active project in the IDE, there are tabs above the main work area. There is a tab for each form, class file, and module. Clicking on the tabs changes the main work area to the specific element in the project. Once program code has been added to a form or module, it has what is called a class file associated with the element. This class file contains all the code for all the elements within a form or module. Here is an example of a project's form class file code from a more complex project. Next is the editing toolbar for the current project. These buttons perform editing functions related to the specific project elements in the current project. The first section of the editing toolbar contains quick buttons to toggle between the code window and form window, the Save button, the Reload button, the Undo button, and the Redo button. These buttons pertain to project elements and file editing. The next section of the editing toolbar contains the menu editor. This is where menus are created within forms. Then the next section of the editing toolbar's quick buttons control IDE visual assistance functions during design time. They toggle the grid on and off and toggle the info tooltips. Next are the buttons that assist placement and arrangement of controls within forms. They include Bring to Foreground, Send to the Background, Center Horizontally, Center Vertically. Finally, the last set of buttons are used to manipulate the text font characteristics of the various project elements. Their functions include Select Font, Set Bold, Set Italic, Underline, Increase Font Size, Decrease Font Size, Use the default font, Set the background color, and Set the foreground color. That concludes the overview of the GAMBAS IDE. These first 4 tutorials have covered an enormous amount of material. Basically, the why, what, and how of visual programming and the GAMBAS language. In the coming tutorials, I hope to be creating many simple projects and programs which demonstrate the fundamentals of using GAMBAS and the various elements of the language. The next tutorials and actual hands-on programming should be a lot of fun and allow a great deal of creativity as you take the basic building blocks of programming and begin to experiment and create projects for your own purposes and amusement. Again, thanks for taking a look at these videos and joining me as I explore the GAMBAS language and making these videos. I hope you find them useful.